It's a very sort of charming kind of communal
It is much more of an interrelated community now than it was, say, 50 years ago, when someone like Count Ceylon could say, no dealer must ever cross my threshold, or when it might have been... It's interesting to me, going back to Hugo's talk this morning, hearing about Otley, and Otley wore all these hats, and he was a collector, he was a dealer, he was an agent, he was also a scholar, and he was a keeper at the British Museum. Well, and Hugo started at Christie's and is now keeper of the British Museum. But 40 or 50 years ago, that sort of transition didn't happen. But I think we are a much more close-knit community, and we can benefit from each other's experience.
Absolutely. I think, when you say 40, 50 years ago, but think of Christopher White. When he had been at Colnages and might have gone back to the British Museum, and there was a frisson about, I don't know whether you can come back to this
exactly.
again.
If once you've left, you're gone.
You're a merchant. So I think, the four estates in the drawings world, collectors, curators, scholars, meaning art historians connected with the university or something like that, and dealers, I think this is the elision between these four estates has now erased, I hope, all barriers or fences. We all have a lot of knowledge. We all have a lot of passion. Most of us participate in all of those characteristics. I mean, at different points in my life, I was a dealer. I've been a collector still. I've been a curator still. And I was a scholar for a while. But, I think that, as Mark says, anybody who's getting involved, do please ask questions. It's very important to, not only for the conversation, which can be mutually beneficial, but also just that in the end of the day, as Mark says, you're going to buy something. And so you're laying out a certain amount of money, and you want to have a sense of what it means, and so forth. And you should ask questions, and you should not feel that the art world is some sort of sacred place, like a sacred grove or something which is totally removed from property and finances. It isn't. And I sometimes think when I hear what goes on at one or another trustee meeting, not necessarily at the National Gallery, that, you have these hard-headed businessmen who make lots of money and then become trustees, and then they kind of check their brains at the door when they come into the museum, thinking, oh, well, this is too precious, this is too important, this is too sacred. I can't really ask the kinds of questions I would ask if I was buying, I don't know, an island somewhere. And so I encourage you not to worry about that. Ask the hard questions, and that's where the relationship between a collector and a curator can be very important, because both sides, the collector, the dealer, the curator, the dealer, the collector, the curator, everybody has a symbiotic relationship. Everybody gets something out of this. And the collector, I would encourage collectors to use your curators. Use your curators. They are publicly financed. They are there to help. Their salaries are paid one way or the other by the public, and they have an educational duty and, in my opinion, a duty to foster private collecting, even if it doesn't immediately benefit the museum. So
we also learn as curators from private collectors bringing in things to show us and
totally.
To discuss it. So it's not just the information and benefit is not one-directional.
Not at all. But I think that when you're starting, if we're talking about people really getting into it, then the curator at your museum or another museum can be an enormous resource in terms of thinking about what it is that you're planning to buy or thinking about buying, commenting on it, doing the scut work, if you will, to see, is it really a Guercino? Is it really the Guercino from the Northwood Park sale? Is it really the best female nude in America? All of those kinds of issues which you may hear or read in a write-up, you can ask your local curator or a curator that you like at another museum, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And that I think is a very important role for the curator. And if you get a sense that the curator you ask doesn't understand the question or doesn't know how to answer it, move on. Move on. Don't wait. Don't wait. Move on. It's like the issue of honesty. I think every dealer in this room, and I think they're totally honest, so I'm not saying that with respect to anybody here, but if you get even the whiff that something is being said that's not quite right, move on. Don't hesitate, because these are important issues, and they're issues, real issues about finances and property, which go in addition to and beyond the emotional and artistic issues of the works of art that you're looking at. So I'm a kind of tough-nosed guy in that respect. And I think the relationship that can develop then between a curator and a collector can be marvelous. The major donors at the National Gallery, including the present collector, I consider to be very close personal friends. And I think the friendship aspect is extremely important in the relationship between collectors and curators.
Now, I'd like to take exception with one thing you said.
Please.
And that is, I think it's the point of going to the curator to ask, to inquire about, to gain more knowledge about a drawing that a person is considering buying is very important in terms of, the scholarship behind it, whether the attribution's right, all that sort of stuff. But I don't think what I think is very dangerous in that relationship is the question, is this the best female nude in America? That is the kind of question that is irrelevant in the acquisition process. And that's the kind of question that puts the collector in a very powerless position. Because if that person is thinking that they only want to buy the best female nude in America by Guercino, say, as we were talking about, then first of all, that person has probably the wrong instincts for collecting. And secondly, the curator is going to further corrupt that instinct by saying, well, I'm not sure, there's one at Harvard which I like better, or there's one,
but I think
the
you
one
see,
at Harvard's not available.
Yes, no, I know, but all I'm saying is that this kind of conversation all of a sudden puts you off the track of what the whole thing is about, which is the drawings by Guercino. It's this beautiful drawing of a female nude. It's authentic. It's expensive. Do I like it? Do I love it? Do I want to have it? That's where
I would think
that's
fire in your belly.
Well, I would think that's what the curator also should say. Does it really matter?
But it often is not the situation because, of course, curators being scholars and being contentious and being sort of interested in
cautious,
interested in making an observation when asked, as opposed to desisting from that. I think that's where we often get off the track with what I call collaborative collecting. Mm-hmm. And I think the great thing about the collection that we're looking at here at Smith is that this is a collection that was formed almost without exception through the decision-making process of the individual involved. And that
absolute personal discernment.
That is old-fashioned collecting. That's the best collecting. It's why the collection has the strength it has.
Completely agree.
Sorry.
As an exhibition, the subtitle for the exhibition is I can't remember if it's private and public affair or public and private affair, but I've noticed that it's part of an ever-growing phenomenon of museum exhibitions devoted to collections of drawings assembled by private individuals. And to some extent, it's a trend that challenges me wearing my master drawings hat because it's very difficult to find reviewers for these types of exhibitions. Yet nowadays, they are amongst the most common vehicles for curatorial scholarship. I think one of the best scholarship is being done for catalogs of exhibitions of private collections. And Andrew and I have talked about this in the past, and I keep trying to twist his arm. He has promised, when his next deadline is over, to write a piece about this for Master Drawings, which would then preface a listing of the most important private collection exhibitions that have taken place over the last 10 years. But I just wondered if you could comment on why you think what accounts for this ever-growing number of such exhibitions?
Well, I think the growth of the number of private collections is one of the fundamental things, that there are more private collections. There is always the development of a kind of ethos or a kind of practice, and this kind of practice of doing exhibitions of private collections of drawings has become firmly centered in the United States, I think, and it's a very good thing, in my opinion. There are not nearly so many exhibitions of private collections of paintings or of sculpture or of medals or plaquettes or anything like that. Drawings is a special phenomenon. It is, I think, especially attractive to our public at the museums, certainly at the National Gallery, and as Suzanne said this morning, Chicago. We've developed a clientele, if you will, people who expect to see private collections of drawings and of works of art on paper because of their intimacy. They're more appropriate for modern spaces, etc., etc. People love seeing them. In the old days, in the 70s, when I first came, we did a lot of seriatim exhibitions from museums, from the Ashmolean, from the Fitzwilliam, from Chatsworth, from Stockholm, etc. We don't do those anymore, but the build-up of a knowledge of works of art on paper, which are easier to transport and easier to show, so that, I remember the Delacroix, that fantastic horse from Budapest and so forth. Yes, and I remember that other Delacroix, and so now when I see this Delacroix, yes, this is quite different, this coastline scene, the splashy watercolor like the others, yes, but very different subject matter. People do build up a reserve of knowledge, and I think that adds to the enjoyment of the exhibition. So the increase in the number of collections, the interest in seeing these histories or many histories of art represented by collections of drawings again and again. And there's no doubt about it that scholarship in general has turned very much to exhibition catalogs for many reasons, and that has to do with the economics of publishing, that you don't have, perhaps Hugo could have 50 years ago done his great portrayal of 15th century Italian drawing when Phaidon was still alive, and perhaps they would have published, I don't know, 150 or 200 color illustrations with ravishing photography, but that doesn't happen anymore. That's just not the way it goes. So museum publications are not the only venue, but they're a wonderful venue for beautifully produced catalogs with scholarship. And I think from the point of view of the scholars, the exhibition catalog is a splendid venue for publication because it will come out. I don't know how many of you have written books for university presses or for commercial presses, but the great thing about a museum exhibition catalog is the exhibition starts and the catalog is there. And so for even young scholars in universities, assistant professors trying to build up their bibliography and so forth, you're assured that in fact your article will be published and by a certain time, not being kicked down the road, 5 or 7 or 10 years. So I think there are again symbiotic relationships and benefits, but the interesting thing that Jane focuses on is that there's some very good scholarship being published
it's cutting-edge scholarship,
in
and it
exhibition
doesn't
catalogs.
Get addressed. It doesn't get recognized. We as a public, we as scholars benefit from it. But in terms of the review scholarship in periodicals, I feel it's a neglected vehicle.
It is also in terms of a kind of just pointing out. I don't know what I was thinking of doing was pointing out, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 examples of entries on specific works of art that really took that field forward further. I think that's a very important thing to see.